So here we are now in second wave feminism. And there's a variety of different types of movements here. And I want to emphasize these are movements and not specific groups or organizations, because each one of these movements, there are groups and organizations that we might identify as examples of them. So again, second wave feminism, huge category. Within that, a variety of movements. And within those movements are various groups that we'd probably put into some of those categories. So the first type of second wave feminism is radical feminism. And this is one of the earlier ones we get. It sort of begins in the 1960s, by the way, which is largely when we think of second wave feminism beginning is around 1960, or becoming very active, the women sort of coming together. These were, a lot of it was women who had been involved in protests over issues of civil rights and anti-war and so forth, but they experienced a lot of sexism within those movements, right? And so feeling pushed out, feeling left out, they formed their own groups and began working on issues that affected women. Because in part, when they're talking about issues, say, of civil rights, trying to point out the way that it wasn't just black men and women who were discriminated against, but white women were also discriminated against, and there was some pushback against that. Actually, it also pushed back even just the idea of focusing on how black women were affected differently than white women. So radical feminism comes out of that, though radical feminism is largely populated by white women. It has to be said, largely by white women. And really, I have to say, and this is an addendum to what I said about first wave feminism, so you'll want to add to your notes that first wave feminism was pretty much exclusively white women. First wave feminism was almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively white women. So it was white women, middle class women. Working class women weren't much considered or included. That was the case of first wave feminism. In radical feminism, you do still see it's predominantly it is white women, but there's an important idea here that comes out of radical feminism, and that is the idea that the oppression of women is the fundamental form of oppression. I'll say that again. The oppression of women is the fundamental form of oppression. So all other forms of oppression and subjugation of people is based upon the model that has been used by men to oppress and subjugate women. And you say, well, I mean, what about, when things about issues of race in this country? It's not everywhere in this country, but, in the South of this country, certainly in the 19th century and 18th century and a good bit of the 19th century, black people were slaves. So, well, yes, okay, so treating anybody, male or female, who is black, treating them as property. But women were legally considered for many years in most states to be property. Women were property. In fact, women could not inherit anything because property cannot inherit property. That's a real thing. First wave feminists fought against that, by the way. Right? And so also if you look, and so you think, well, then also, of course, people who are black couldn't vote, right? Male or female, right? And then with 15th Amendment, black men could begin voting, but black women could still not vote, right? Nor could white women, for that matter, right? And yes, there were laws in place that did try to keep African American people from voting in much the same ways. There were also efforts that were made in more subtle ways to discourage women from voting, even when they had the right to vote. Discourage women. Women had been discouraged from voting before. So yes, the idea is that the oppression of all people is modeled on how women have been oppressed in society. Radical feminists began espousing the idea that the personal is political. We've talked about that before briefly, right? But the personal is political means that when we say things like whether or not a woman, or man for that matter, but if a woman goes back to work after having a child, that's a choice she makes to do that. No, it's not just a personal choice, it's a political choice, because if she's not given protection from her job to take time off, if she's not given any paid maternity leave, if her job can fire her for having had a baby, which can still in fact happen, because if she doesn't return to work on time and it's a small enough organization, or she's a part-time employee, she can just be fired for not reporting to work. right? Whether or not the woman returns to work, in fact, is a political issue. So the personal is political because her political decisions greatly impact our personal, our personal decisions. It's not from any specific group or movement, but I will offer, because it has the word radical in it, I'll offer to you this definition of feminism. I'm not going to give you a definition of feminism for the class, but I will offer you this feminism that over the years many students have found interesting and compelling. And it is, feminism is the radical notion that women are people. Right? And I think radical feminists pretty much like that one. Right? So feminism is the radical notion that women are people. And so this is very much what radical feminists we're fighting for, right? And radical feminism also, the women did a lot of things like engaging in what are called consciousness raising groups. It's trying to talk to women about things they were going through to make them aware of, not aware of, but so they could get together and share their common frustrations and realize it wasn't just them being difficult. There was a larger systemic problem. So consciousness raising groups about women getting together, talk about their personal problems and seeing that their problems they were having many a times weren't just personal issues, they were part of a systemic issues related to how women were treated in society and in their homes and so forth. And from radical feminism, we get lesbian feminism. And in part, it was women who found that within the radical movement, the issues that they cared about and faced specifically as lesbians were often ignored and pushed aside. So you have, and this is not uncommon in a variety of social movements, you have different forms of sexism, racism, heterosexism showing up. We see this also in things like gay rights movement and civil rights. It's a perpetual problem. Anyway, it's too deep to go into at the moment, right? But so we get then lesbian feminism. And lesbian feminists were very much interested, as you might imagine, in securing for women the same legal rights that that their heterosexual, counterparts had, right? So the rights that straight women had when they were married, the lesbian women wanted for themselves. They wanted recognition and rights as women who loved other women that were denied to them on that basis, right? So lesbian feminism, it's largely the radical feminists who were lesbian and, again, saw how their concerns were not quite identified by radical feminism. And so that's how we get, lesbian feminism, right? Also, something really important here is that lesbian feminists said that you didn't have to be lesbian necessarily to be a lesbian feminist, believed that true freedom, lesbian feminists said, true freedom comes from when women no longer order their lives around the lives of men. Right? So true freedom for women will come when women no longer order their lives around the lives of men. And when I say order their lives around, I mean it's like when women no longer plan their lives for where for the moment now that I become married and then I follow his path, right? Or no longer make all their choices based upon the needs and well-being of their husbands and their husbands' concerns, but that they really take a stand for themselves as their own persons, right? So true freedom for women would be when they no longer order their lives around men. It didn't mean hating men. It just meant saying women have a tendency to do many things in their lives according to what ultimately are the needs of the men, doing things like so men and women have a child together, and the women have to give up their goals to stay home and raise the child while he goes out and works, and then they move for his job and for his advancement, and they don't ever make decisions so that she can have employment and advancement herself in a career field that she should choose, right? So that's one of the things that lesbian feminism looked at. Now, from lesbian feminism, we also get then this notion of separatism. So separatism, and there you can probably find some separatists around today, but separatism was just that's about separating. The idea, and many of these were lesbian, but not necessarily. So many separatists are lesbian separatists, but not necessarily. But these were women who chose to form communities of other women and live apart from the rest of society. So they chose to form communities of other women and live apart from society. And it may just be that 2, 3, 4 women buy a house together, and they just decide there's never going to be a man who enters this house. We're gonna try to really form our lives together here. We will try to buy all things from other women. Only women come in to do repairs in the home, right? So independent communities just for women. The idea being that society as a whole is sexist, homophobic, and really sort of toxic for women. And as such, it's just not a healthy place for women. And so if women can form communities amongst themselves, not to say that women don't ever have to carry discrimination, of course they do, but that's the best chance a woman's going to see for having a life of respect and equality and equity is among other women, because society at large is just so toxic to women. And so it's separatism, and often lesbian separatism, but not always. Not always. Right? And because they were always sort of pulling out to themselves so much, or separating themselves out, often not very politically involved or having much impact in politics, as you imagine, because they are more insular, very sort of protective of themselves. So that's separatism. Another type of second wave feminism is Revelrism. Right. So you have separatism, you see the word separate in there. So Revelrism, you see the word, well, not so much revelor, but revel, right? When you revel in something, you enjoy it, you love it, you celebrate it, right? You're reveling in it, right? So we talk about college students reveling in their freedom when they move away, or they move out of the home where they grew up, they move away from the adults who've raised them, and they revel in their freedom by staying up too late and making bad food choices and all those sorts of things. That's what it means to revel, right? And so Revelrism are women who want to revel in, to celebrate, to place value upon those things that we've traditionally marked as feminine, right? To celebrate and value those things we've traditionally marked as feminine. And because we've marked as feminine, then we've often looked down upon. Right? So Revelrism are the women who say, we often think of cooking and sewing and maybe gardening, the care of children, planning kids' birthday parties. Which think, who cares about planning kids' birthday parties? When you're a little kid, it's a big deal to you, right? If you're a family that celebrates birthday parties. That all those things have often been the tasks of women, and to celebrate that women are doing those things and to put value upon them. But historically, we have this tendency to devalue anything that involves women, right? That when something involves women, we have a tendency to think less of it. And so Revelrism is to say, yeah, so women do most of the cooking. Can we please recognize it as a great art and talent and skill and celebrate that? And the same of sewing and various domestic crafts and the raising of children, right? To really celebrate it, right? And to reclaim the sort of traditional, they might have said, some might say innate, not all revelers do certainly, but the things that we associate with being, feminine, to celebrate it, to not be ashamed of it, and to find power in it. But an important part of it was culturally getting people to value it as well. So that's women. They're trying, or that's revelers, right? Trying to regain respect for the things that we associate as being women. After Revelrism, we can talk, and these don't necessarily come in order. I'm just saying the next one I'm going to talk about now is ecofeminism. So ecofeminism, or you might hear it as ecofeminism, but I've always heard it as ecofeminism. One of those times when you put two things together and the pronunciation change. So if you put a dash between eco and feminism, right? Oh yeah, eco is in like ecology and so forth. Yes, right? The idea that the subordination of the physical world, right, the environment, the natural world, the world, the disrespect and subordination of that is part and parcel yeah, of how we treat women, or really the disrespect and subordination of women is part and parcel of how we treat the natural world. That we've associated women with the natural world, and so women have been exploited the same way that other natural resources of the world are exploited. Is sort of the short, the short version of it. There's a really clear argument for this if you're to look at a lot of the history in medicine and how women have been treated in medicine. First off, women have a tendency to be referred to as female patients and not patients. Men are just patients, and female patients are just that, they're female patients. And so they were sometimes excluded from their adverse effects. The women specifically experienced in drug trials were often disregarded because that was just an anomaly that is experienced by female patients, you know, half the patients. Anyway, but if we look, for instance, at the history of obstetrics, so beginning somewhere in the mid 20th century and through much of the 20th century, and really changing as we come into the 21st century, um, when women gave birth, it was seen as being something that had to be kept sterile, that giving birth was a dirty process, and giving birth is sort of a messy process. There's lots of fluids and things. There's fluids, there's some blood sometimes. Some women will in fact have a bowel movement while they're pressing, where they're bearing down to birth the baby. I remember when my wife and I went to our the birthing class before our first child was born, and the woman said, "Some are afraid they're going to poop while they're giving birth, and if you do, all it means is you're using the right muscle group to push out that baby. So if you do, I'm glad, because it means you're using the right muscles that it takes to push out that baby." So anyway, and so you starting in the mid 20th century and on, you see things like trying to make birth sterile. The idea that women's bodies were sort of these, or birthing was sort of this dirty, messy process. We should try to control and sterilize it. So therefore, before women gave birth, they were given enemas to clean out their bowel. Women were shaved of their pubic hair, just like you would say in like for doing surgical prep. Right. People then started, gowning up, not so they wouldn't get dirty, but so they wouldn't create infection. Women's legs were kept up into stirrups, so they were restrained up in stirrups. Drapes, right, were put over her stomach and over her legs, and it was treated much anyway. So it was the idea that we treat this very sort of clean, clinical way. I'm not saying that keeping things sterile during medical procedures is a bad thing. I'm just saying that we've moved away from that for a reason. By the way, many women now will deliver a baby in in the bed where they were laboring. It's in a hospital. People gown up and put masks on because they don't want to get themselves all messy and dirty, and they wear gloves for good reason. But yeah, women can be in multiple positions when they give birth, squatting, leaning, on their back if they like, knees to their chest. Very common. Apparently, some women prefer to give birth with knees to their chest. I understand. I don't know. Right? Some women give birth, like to give birth standing, makes some people nervous. But anyway, right? But so the idea, this whole history of obstetrics I'm giving you, or the quick and dirty of it, is to emphasize that this was an advent about seeing this function of women's bodies that had occurred for millennia as being messy and dirty like the environment, and something that we need to clean up and control in a very sort of clinical, industrial way, is how women's bodies were treated for a long time. Women, late 20th century, women giving birth, their arms were restrained. Their arms were actually tied down while giving birth, right? You wouldn't really do that today. Thank you. Yeah, so going back to ecofeminism then, the idea that the way that we see nature as unruly and messy and dirty and we have to control it, that's also how we treat women. And so women are treated as being part of the natural world in a sort of masculinist, industrialist, right? So a masculinist and industrialist worldview that sees nature as dirty and needing us to intervene and control. Likewise, women's bodies are messy and something that have to be controlled. And so that's ecofeminism.